At the casino buffet, my daughter-in-law said you're lucky we even brought you. She didn't know I owned 8% of the resort and her husband's job. The casino buffet dazzled in riotous splendor, neon lights dancing off polished marble, glasses chiming with ice and champagne, an intoxicating hum of laughter, the rich aroma of roast meats surrendered to sweet glints of multi-course indulgence. My silver brooch, old and unassuming, caught one of those neon sparks, just a momentary glitter before it vanished into the noise. I stood at the edge of that banquet, wearing my faded teal dress and shoes scuffed by lifetimes of hard work. I was as out of place as a lone cactus in a formal garden, and yet I stood, unmoved. My daughter-in-law, Felicia, leaned close enough for her voice to carry like a scalpel through that symphony. You should be grateful we even brought you here. If not, we'd probably have left you eating thin soup at home, sinking into memories no one cares about. Her words landed like ice cubes down my spine. I felt every pair of eyes in that room shift toward me, like they were tasting the sharpness in her tone. My hands trembled, not from age, but from the shock that the person I once nurtured with such hope could so willingly humiliate me. There was a pause. A woman laughed, soft, knowing. A cluster of businessmen swapped glances, and I stood there, breath steadying, heart pounding, with the truth that I was not who they thought I was. My voice unfolded, low and unhurried. Actually, I signed off on the development of this very resort. Silence erupted. In that stillness, I saw Felicia's smile freeze mid-curl. Glasses stopped tinkling. Evening chatter died. Their regard pierced me. No longer pity or blind indifference, but the brittle crackle of revelation. Yes, I repeated, with a gravity that carried the weight of years. I approved every architectural drawing, every facade you admire, every corridor you stroll through. Every eye in the room was locked on me now. I gazed out at the buffets. Shrimp cocktails glistened plump on ice, pastries gleamed like tiny moons. Roast prime ribs steamed like temptation itself, and I held their gaze. A man in a tuxedo, one of the resort's VIP regulars, leaned toward a waiter. The waiter froze mid-pour. Felicia's mouth twitched. She pressed her lips together, pulling in that perfectly curled upper lip. The flush of embarrassment rose in her cheeks. Every witty remark she had prepared dissolved into the hush. I turned my face downward, as though dusting invisible lint from my sleeve. I felt something inside me, centuries of silent perseverance, settling into a steady iron-tempered calm. And this moment, my rebuttal, my miracle of presence, marked the true beginning of everything. I was no longer the invisible elder with a fading spark. I was the one who lit the place. They called me the Desert Witch long before I ever signed a development permit for that casino resort. My hands, calloused from decades of planting and tending, once cultivated healing herbs, not sleek landscapes and luxury towers. I lived simply, but every morning I rose to the same purpose, to care for wounded hearts with mortar and time and memory. After Henry passed, his laughter already quieted with the wind, I turned that scruffy patch of land by the old barn into a refuge. I planted lavender to ease anxiety, chamomile to steady trembling hands, calendula for burns and bruised souls. My lab was a humble wooden crossbow of clay, heated in a kiln I built beside where my husband used to sit. Old vets from the nearby base would come in secret. They did not owe me anything, no medals or grand ceremonies. They came for tea that smelled of rosemary and sunlit dirt. My son, Marcus, and his new wife, Felicia, saw only the dust and weeds. They called my work delusional, said I was living in a daze. She laughed at me in front of friends. Do you think she's gathering healing dust, Marcus? She's just a magnet for broken things. Marcus stood silent. Their friends nodded. And soon, my garden was the one thing in that house they would rather forget. A monument to old-world sentimentality. Then, they began whispering it behind their closed doors. Mother is unstable. Is she still wasting time on that nonsense? Marrying her meant inheriting haunted land. It hurt like more than barbs. It bruised me in a place they could not see. Every insult fell into that gentle garden, and it withered, silent, yellowing. I was no modern investor, no real estate visionary. Yes, I insisted on keeping that land when the developers came sniffing, and so that's when they feared me. They said I was clinging to a ghost, refusing the future, holding them back. Once, I overheard Felicia tell a neighbor, "It's like she's chained us to dirt." Those words echoed in my ears until I forgot how to breathe. In that moment, I understood that even bones buried beneath concrete retain their story. As I bent over the soil, planting a fresh row of yarrow, I felt the pulse of life beneath my fingers. I thought of Henry, the way he called me herbal sculptor. The names people called me were false. I might have been many things, old, unconventional, unwilling to let go, but not invisible. Every night later, when the wind was still, I would sit by the porch and say, "One day, they will understand the medicine in roots." I did not know when. I only knew it was true. I held on to that land when it meant nothing in their ledger. I held on to it when they shoved me to hospital wings that smelled of disinfectant and pity. I held on to it when friends turned away or whispered that my mind was slipping. Not because I missed what was lost, but because I believed in what could still be. So now, as I walk into that grand buffet, velvet-clad and shimmering, I understand that every whisper that cut me, every dismissal, every laugh, was a silent bell calling me to rise. I am bruised, yes, but I am rooted. They saw dust, I saw promise. They called me delusional, I called that land salvation. And if healing can be quietly warped into shame, then perhaps it is my quiet defiance that will right the scales. The casino's glow pulsed in the background like a heartbeat from another world, but on the inside, my own world had begun to unravel. Marcus had always been soft-spoken, gentle in his youth, but the recent months changed him. He started borrowing money from the casino line of credit, just temporarily, he whispered, when he thought I couldn't hear. Then more. All under the label of business expense. Felicia glided around our modest home in a designer dress, checking her phone. Each time she looked up, I saw her eyes flicker with annoyance, as though my mere presence forced a glitch in her flawless expectations. They started suggesting I step away from daily living. "Just take a sabbatical," they said. "Go visit your sister for a while." I knew better. There was no vacation, only displacement. One evening, Felicia pressed my hand in the kitchen and said quietly, like an arrangement, "Mother, why don't you come stay closer to the resort for a bit, maybe help with light duties? It might lighten the financial burden on us." On the surface, her words sounded considerate, but the shift in Marcus's muted tone underneath rang of something colder. Soon after, I arrived at the resort not as a guest but as something less, a volunteer, maybe even unpaid staff. They issued me a badge labeled buffet assistant. My job? Straightening napkin dispensers, refilling water stations, arranging cutlery. I recall standing there, silver hair pinned tight, apron embroidered, and thinking, so this is how I end up in their world, with dust on my arms and no invitation, but feeling every eye slide past me like I no longer belong. Felicia walked behind me once, tapping her fit heel against the tile. "See, this works. At least now we are not carrying the burden of your care." She meant the cost, the obligation, the love. All of it. I wanted to protest, but I remembered Henry's voice, calm and secure. "A kind heart will always cost, Dorothy. But you made the world better, my dear." It took that memory to keep me rooted. They thought they were easing expenses, but really they were exiling me. Days piled on. Each morning the alarm clock became harder to rise to. I came to hate the way my uniform brushed against my knees, the way guests eyed me like I might vanish if they tapped hard enough. But I mastered politeness, pouring tea, filling buffet plates, smiling while my hands shook. Marcus visited once, sliding a bagel across the table, his eyes glued to his phone. He muttered, "Mom, thanks for doing your part." I looked at him, older, worn. The man who once nestled in my lap was now carrying the weight of our ruin in his averted gaze. Inside me, a storm was quietly raging. I saw through their intentions. Their financial smiles masked the ledger of Marcus's debts, and the manipulation to pawn me off, pretended as care. They had created a narrative. Grandma is frail, needs us to help. But that was just the prelude to removing me from their lives, from inheritance, from empathy. One evening, a flashlight sweep across the buffet stations showed me elbowing another tray of cold cuts into place, and heard guests whisper, "Is she okay?" The weight of invisibility hurt more than their contempt. There are battles you fight silently. My heart kept that war silent because the chef praised my calm hands, the guests praised my gentle smile. I would not let them see I knew. I would not give them the fuel of regret. But storms do not die. They gather. One Sunday afternoon, Felicia marched up to my station and said, "We are finally cutting Mom's allowance and unpaid help will continue. Do not expect a raise or recognition. This is temporary." Her tone was delivery, not mercy. I saw Marcus's face, shadowed behind her, guilt paled across his features. But he said nothing. This unstated silence spoke louder than any confrontation. That night, I cried into a cup of chamomile that smelled faintly of home. I realized I was not broken. I was waiting for the moment they revealed the true shape of their betrayal so I could rise, quietly, like the land I loved, and show them how deep a root could be. Their plan to exhale me was unfolding, but somewhere inside, I was already plotting the day I would return, not as a ghost, not as a volunteer, but as the architect they buried beneath their ambition. That day was coming, and when it did, this buffet of theirs would taste of truth. I stood near the buffet's edge, when the lights dimmed for a split second, like a theater holding its breath. Then the screens lining the wall blinked back to life, and bold words fractured the hum of conversation. Official alert. Dorothy Harper, 8% equity stakeholder governance, restructuring active. Every glow of neon seemed to dim. The silverware stopped tinkling. Muscles in faceless strangers at the buffet tightened. I felt a presence touch my elbow. One of the casino executives, slim, immaculate, holding out a small wooden box. The grain gleamed like a secret. "Here," he said quietly. "The key to the executive owner's office." The words struck me like a bell tolling in a hollow church. A symbolic gift, yes, but also a public acknowledgement of my silent authority. Felicia's face turned pallid enough to cast a shadow like she'd glimpsed something dangerous in the mirror. Marcus opened his mouth, eyes wide, but nothing came out. I lifted the box and opened it gently, my hand steady. "I started investing quietly last year," I said, voice level, carrying beneath it the weight of years lost to neglect. "Every time you scoffed at me, every quiet whisper that I belonged to the past, mine was the dividend paying for the very lights, the wine, the buffet." Stillness roared in that room. Guests paused mid-bite. Waiters froze in motion. Laughter died. My words hung like a chandelier suspended on broken wires. Beautiful, trembling, inevitable. I closed the wooden box with a soft click. The executive turned, a nod. On his walkie-talkie he whispered something, and I felt the air shift. From behind me, I sensed others stepping back, as though space itself recognized the shift in atmosphere. I was no longer defined as an aged sentiment. I had re-entered as the architect of power. Felicia's eyes flicked to the screen again. Her earlier smugness curdled into confusion. Something in her didn't compute. She grasped for control, but all control had quietly slipped away. I inhaled slowly, tasting the moment. The sweet electricity of a revelation that held entire lives in balance. My next words broke the hush. It was never in neediness that I held onto that land. It was in faith. I looked around the glittering buffet. Rows of seafood, cheese towers, flamboyant desserts. I believed that healing was more than nostalgia, and now it seems they needed it more than I did. I turned, leaning into one of the screens as it faded to menu selections. In that reflection, I saw someone they did not expect to find, a woman who survived disgrace and came back unbowed. Marcus swallowed, lunging forward with a question on his lips. "How did you—" I lifted a finger to the executive, who turned a discreet dial. Security stepped into vantage spots. Nothing was openly threatening, but I realized they formed the veins of my new power. Felicia reached out, her voice trembling. Why didn't you say anything?" I closed my jacket, as though covering wounds that had healed. They had tried to push me into irrelevance. Now they called the silence dangerous. "Because every heart learns on its own when it's ready for truth," I answered softly. "And yours were not ready until now." Some guests started murmuring. The buzz mutated, no longer pity, but awe. I dared, just for an instant, to look at Felicia. Something hollow flickered in her eyes, like recognition of a grave miscalculation. That wooden box felt lighter in my hand, its weight dispersed into the space around me. I placed it gently on a display table by the buffet line, accessible but not inviting. In that moment, power was not loud. It was a silent boot, placed firmly in the center of the room. Everyone felt it. No celebration, no drama, a subtle, seismic shift. I was out of her narrative. I was rewriting the story, quietly, with precision, with justice. The moment I snapped the wooden box shut, I sensed a shift, like air released from a balloon. But the real storm arrived in the blink of a camera flash. My lawyer entered, gait confident and purposeful, wearing a tailored suit that spoke of courtroom authority. Without ceremony, he handed a formal document to the resort manager. I could feel every eye crane toward us as the manager broke the seal and read the contents. A temporary freeze on Marcus's position pending a full investigation, and a complaint filed against Felicia for elder exploitation and abuse, charges which, under Nevada law, carried serious legal weight, including potential felony repercussions. Felicia's face went from shock to fury in the span of a heartbeat. She clamped her mouth shut, eyes fixed on my lawyer as he detailed how, under Nevada Revised Statute NRS 209-3 and NRS 2577, exploiting an elder or attempting to control their assets for personal gain was a prosecutable offense. In Nevada, such exploitation, even against a trusted relative, could result in years behind bars and heavy fines. I stood steady. I had not wanted her downfall, only fairness. Now it would unfold in plain view. At that instant, a casino manager appeared, composed, and led Felicia away from the crowded buffet floor toward a private balcony overlooking the strip. The cameras, already live-streaming the event, fanned toward the balcony, essentially turning a private family collapse into a public spectacle. Viewers around the world watched, one of them perhaps already tweeting, "Daughter-in-law exposed on live stream for exploiting elderly casino owner." Felicia's hands trembled as she was escorted out of the main hall, stripped of her VIP privileges, her badge clipped off and placed on a silent tray. The guests had gone from polite attention to rapt fascination. Whispers at their tables buzzed like electric wires. I stepped forward, nodding in solemn gratitude to the lawyer and the staff. My voice carried across the room. I did not want this to be a spectacle. I only wanted us to live honestly. But if silence invites betrayal, then truth must be spoken. The glare of flashbulbs followed me. I could taste the shift in atmosphere, empathy, outrage, admiration. My betrayers had performed my exile with such ease. Now the executive undercurrents rose, anchoring me firmly in place. I realized then that I had never been the guest here, but the guardian of something they could only approximate. On the balcony, Felicia stood rigid, arms folded. The crowd's roar became a tide, part horror, part vindication. She looked at me, her eyes full of lines she had never seen before, of a woman they had believed weak, but found unbreakable. My lawyer stood at my side, glancing at the document that would ground the investigation. He wasn't just a man in a suit, he was the first wave of consequence. Felicia tried to speak, but no words formed. Her husband Marcus paled beside her, not at the accusation, but at the collapse of the illusion he too had built. I returned my attention to the guests and said quietly, "If this buffet tasted bitter to you, let it be a warning. Power is not inherited, it is honored." At that moment, a reporter mic'd up, voice taut with incredulity. "In front of all of Las Vegas, we have just witnessed a public escalation. Felicia Harper, once a celebrated part of this resort's VIP circle, now under formal investigation for elder exploitation." The cameras panned to Felicia's stunned expression, flash clash, and while she faltered, I felt the steady pulse of memory and justice flow through me, quiet, deliberate, undeniable. The manager closed the balcony door behind them. I turned back to the buffet table. My table, as empty now as it had ever been. But I no longer felt loss. I felt purpose. A woman from the crowd placed a gentle hand on my shoulder. I nodded in thanks, and no longer felt alone. The betrayal had been witnessed. The truth had unspooled in plain sight, and the world had turned. They say justice comes quietly. They say time punishes. Tonight it arrived with witch dignity. Not dramatic flourish, but steel wrapped in respect. I was standing under the soft glow of the chandeliers in the grand hall when Marcus, my son, finally dropped his mask. It wasn't a quiet confession. It was a blow delivered with brazen arrogance. He leaned across the table, eyes blazing with greed. "Mother," he spat, voice rough like gravel. "That remaining 4% of your stake doesn't mean squat. You should just sell it all, or better yet, disappear from the picture so I can finally be the real owner here." The words slammed into me. It wasn't about inheritance or money. It was about erasing the fact that I existed. Felicia stood nearby, face frozen, her manicured nails digging into her palm. She had orchestrated this moment, but now she looked like a specter in the shadows, horrified at the monster she'd helped create. Marcus's betrayal wasn't just cruel, it was compounded by her complicity. I didn't flinch, my heart steadied. My voice remained calm, even gentle. "Marcus," I said, my tone cooler than the air in the hall, "you always were impatient, but I understand now that you don't want just part of what I built. You want me gone, erased." He stood abruptly, mouth quivering. "You're old, Mother," he sneered. "You don't speak business like a man. I'll show you how business is done. Watch me take over." Felicia, unable to bear his contempt, slapped him, hard, so sharply that a crystal wineglass near them cracked and tipped over. Red wine spilled, dripping onto the patterned carpet like spilled blood. He stumbled, stunned, and then they collided. Trading blows in the middle of that glittering grand buffet, chairs scraped, guests gasped. The staff converged in shock. Security moved in fast, 2 men at a time, but not before Marcus turned back, his face twisted. He shoved me, slightly, knocking me toward a pillar. "Learn some humility, old woman," he hissed. "This world doesn't respect tears, it respects strength." Then I did something entirely deliberate. I lifted my eyes and gave a look, just a flicker, to the head of security and the floor manager. That was all it took. Within moments, Marcus and Felicia were being escorted out, surrounded by polite but unyielding security. They shuffled toward the exit, their expressions a blend of fury and humiliation. But before the door swung shut behind them, Marcus skimmed the document's fine print. An acknowledgement of debt, equivalent to what his mother's 8% stake was worth. A legal tether that would tie him to repayment, to accountability. It said that he acknowledged owing me compensation equal to the full value of the 8% stake, effectively registering massive debt. They confiscated his access privileges. He looked taken aback, but also defiant. He hung back, glaring at me. "Your joke," he spat, voice quivering. "You'll lose this castle soon enough, and I'll rebuild without you." I inhaled slowly, calm marble face. "Leave," I replied, voice low, resonant. "Go and pay your debts. Let this place run on its soul, not ambition. As for me, I will become the memory they recall when they step through these doors." That sentence hit him harder than any slap. I don't know whether it was pride or realization, but Marcus's shoulders sagged. His expression slackened, and for a moment he looked defeated, no fight left in him. Then, with a jerk of his head, he walked out. Felicia followed, tears shining in her eyes, but no apology came, no regret. The crowd that witnessed it sat in stunned silence. Some guests, still clutching champagne flutes, stared as if the truth was a wince in reality. Casino staff began rearranging tables to hide the spilled wine. The band resumed, playing a soft, uneasy tune. I stood alone. When I drew in breath, the weight of that moment pulsed through me. The air felt richer, the crystal chandeliers brighter. I was not a relic in the tide. They had tried to bury me in memory, but instead I rose as justice. I turned to the manager who had orchestrated their removal. He nodded at me, head slightly bowed, respect in his eyes. My lawyer, standing quietly at the side, closed a folder as though nothing more needed to be done. He had set everything into motion. I gazed out at the buffet, roast beef, caviar trays, champagne fountains, and saw light, not luxury, a place I built, defended, and would continue to guard. A woman approached, her voice a whisper, trembling. "Mrs. Harper, did you actually?" I simply smiled and said, "Yes." They thought ambition would erase me. but my roots are deeper than ambition can sever. The hall exhaled. Applause did not break out. Instead, hands returned to tables, conversations resumed, but under a new tone, the tone of reverence. I stood among them, an old woman who had borne insult, injury, exile, but who now stood again, unbowed, unforgotten, and armed with the quiet power of truth. I watched as Felicia was officially barred from the resort, her VIP badge collected, her privileges revoked in one swift motion. The hush that followed was both satisfying and heavy, like a deep breath exhaled after enduring too long. Marcus, her co-conspirator, had already vanished in the commotion. No longer a golden heir, he was now a symbol of emotional bankruptcy, a man who gambled fate and lost family. In the days that followed, they quietly whispered about his fall from grace, his ambition that devoured his humanity. I did not gloat, not in words but in the silent dignity of my actions. I observed from the quiet center of the storm, I had not just survived, I had prevailed. Then came the invitation I had not expected. The Nevada State Council on Aging extended an offer. They wanted me to speak at the annual Silver State celebration. The theme, Legacy, Land, and Legacy of Love. A smile curved across my lips the moment I read it. To think, they wanted a real legacy, one not built on real estate speculation or tech startups, but on spirit, endurance, stewardship. On the night of the event, the auditorium brimmed with dignitaries, seniors, and community leaders. The lighting was soft, prayer-like. I sat on the stage among them, clad in a teal dress that felt familiar and a brooch, my husband's favorite, resting against my heart. When I stood to speak, every eye turned toward a woman they once dismissed as inconsequential. I began with a smile. Thank you for having me. I came here this evening not as a rich woman, not even necessarily successful, but as someone who held on to land, not for profit, but for something deeper, healing. My voice trembled only once, when I talked about the veterans who came to my garden, broken and in need of an invisible hand. Time called me many things, I said softly. Desert witch, old fool, a relic unfit for progress. But I learned a truth. Love cultivates resilience. I spoke of the buffet, of the betrayal and the rebirth. I learned that power can be silent. It can grow in quiet hands, through quiet deeds, not loud proclamations. The audience was hushed, moved. When I paused, no one hurried to fill the moment. And tonight, I said, voice gone steady again, I'm here to say, legacy is not passed down like a genie's lamp. Legacy is rooted, and it is earned. And real power is compassion and endurance. I closed by handing over a framed sapling, seedlings from my old garden, to the Nevada State Council. Let this tree represent our shared future, I said, where our roots feed tomorrow's hope. Standing ovation, the hall rose as one. The applause crash-rolled like gentle waves. I closed my eyes, letting it wash over me. I had turned loneliness into respect, quiet into legacy. That night, Nevada didn't celebrate just a survivor, as some young man had whispered in my hearing earlier. They celebrated a mother, a gardener, a quietly outspoken steward. I saw old neighbors from the county stand, wiping tears. I saw veterans nod in solidarity, and I knew the name they would whisper when they walked new farmers to my house, or when they remembered who tended soul and soil before the skylines rose. I left the stage glowing in softer lights and stepped onto the balcony to watch the city Las Vegas Strip, trembling with neon against the desert sky. I traced its lines with a tender gaze, the towers built on land I once named with old stories and healing hands. Then they thought I was lucky to be here, I whispered to the wind. But I have places to tend, hearts to remember, seeds to sow. And so I leaned softly on the railing of that high balcony, a quiet matriarch, rooted in love and legacy. No trophy in hand, but more, the world's quiet respect. I walked out of that casino into the night, the hum of slot machines fading behind me, replaced by the vast silence of Nevada's desert sky. The neon lights of the Strip glowed against midnight like living spirits, electric bruises of ambition. I held the small wooden key in my hand, its weight solid and meaningful. It wasn't just a key, it was my voice, handed back to me in the shape of authority. I stepped onto the sidewalk, where the neon signs pulsed in rhythm with the city's heartbeat. Purple, gold, blue, all colors of Vegas night illuminating the haze. In that glow, I didn't feel small. I felt anchored. Walking down the boulevard, I passed historic facades, old steakhouses that had survived decades of demolition and reinvention, Golden Steer, El Cortez, vintage neon classics that spoke of tenacity. Vegas may tear down landmarks without thought, but tonight I felt like one of those few relics honored for authenticity, not replaced for novelty. They called me lucky when they brought me to that buffet, but as I stepped into the soft hush of the night, key in hand, I knew luck wasn't charity. Luck wasn't pity. Real luck, American-style luck, is silent strength and quiet consequence. I paused at a pedestrian bridge under Fremont Street's luminous canopy. The canopy was dark, the buildings opening into light when the show began. In its quiet before the spectacle, I remembered how I worked that same waiting. I had been in the shadows to let progress pass, unafraid while invisible. Now I stood lit, not because of neon, but by the power reclaimed. My phone buzzed with messages, seniors praising my speech, veterans saying I made them proud, media calling me Nevada's matriarch of the land. I didn't open them right away. Instead, I lifted my face to the sky, where Las Vegas stretched in pulsing statements into infinity. That key in my hand was a conduit of legacy. It represented land, not just property. It represented history, survival, and healing. And tonight I wasn't just existing, I was defining what legacy means. I walked until I reached a patch of desert, just beyond the mixed glare of traffic and signage, sand and scrub grass under moonlight. I placed the key on a rock, careful as I might set a seedling. It felt right, because this land was my life's act of love. I whispered, "This is the real future they wanted to erase." But you cannot erase roots. The key lay there between cracked sandstone and night. Returning to the Strip, the city did not stop its pulsing. The sphere rose in the distance, Vegas always morphing, reinventing, yet always anchored to its neon past. And I was a beacon, not of spectacle but of survival, of grace under pressure. Vegas, with all its kitsch and shine, taught me that real influence is not in soaring towers, but the endurance that gives them value. That night, I walked among light and lived up to being remembered. And when people ask what being lucky means, I will say, it means you are not an ornament, you are a root. So I walk on, into neon and desert, guarded by land that loved me first. And in that quiet, steady truth, I find justice, belonging, and the legacy I choose to leave. Legacy, land, and a legacy of love. I watched from my veranda as Marcus vanished into the night, his silhouette swallowed by the glittering haze of the Strip. There was no triumphant declaration, no public shame, just a figure retreating into nothingness, weighed down by the collapse he'd engineered. In that instant, I understood. He had become not just defeated, but erased. I learned later that he left Nevada entirely, unable to face the ruin of his ambitions. Shame mounted like a shadow too thick to lift. He wandered, friendless and destitute, choosing invisibility over confrontation. In small, silent towns far from the casinos, he became one of the nameless. They called him vagrant, drifter. He slept in alleyways, his pride dwindling like the last ember of a dying fire. I heard from someone who saw him at a bus station in rural Colorado, disheveled, eyes empty, seated on his suitcase. A local sat beside him, offering a slice of bread. Marcus refused, his head bowed. He had lost more than property. He had lost who he thought he was. I did not feel triumphant, only sorrow, for a man who had burned his roots chasing hollow flames, and for a mother who loved him still, in that deep, quiet reservoir where love persists even when the world falls away. With that understanding, I took the key from the veranda and tucked it into the pocket of my coat. It felt warm against my fingertips, a reminder that true belonging stems not from fortune, but from integrity. I began walking, alone, into the cool Nevada night. The neon beat of the casino lights grew distant. I walked through streets that glowed with stories, of travelers who came seeking something greater and those left behind when the night ended. I came to a secluded patch of desert where the air was still and the sky vast. I laid the key on a flat sandstone outcropping beside that sapling I had planted after the festival. The sapling had grown. Delicate leaves whispered promises to the cold wind. I pressed a hand to its stem and whispered, "This is where real legacy begins." I stayed until the city's hum dimmed, replaced by the breath of the desert, quiet, steady, unwavering. When I returned home, I sat on the porch, hands wrapped around a cup of tea scented with sage and lavender, the plants that once healed, that once offered sanctuary to broken souls. I thought of the vets, the kids, the souls I had once mended in that little garden. I realized I had chosen legacy not by winning battles of wealth, but by tending wounds, fostering roots, teaching quiet strength. Marcus would never inherit that. Not because he was disinherited, but because he left, unable to bear the reflection of his own quiet garden growing where he could not stand. As for me, I stood rooted. The night sky stretched wide. The city lights blinked, alive but powerless to reach me. I breathed deep, tasting freedom, not of fortune, not of recognition, but of peace. When people think of luck, they see candlelight or coin tosses. But I know better. I carry a legacy built on root, soil, and love. Quiet, unassuming, immovable. I rose then, leaving the key and the sapling as symbols of what endures. I walked back into the gentle glow of my porch, where nobody celebrated anything loud, but everything was right in that quiet. I came home, head held high, heart still seed deep, and in that silent triumph I understood. Healing is not heroic, it is humble, it is persistence, and in that persistence there is true power, and a legacy of love that no one can ever take away. They thought I was just another old woman, lucky to be invited, lucky to be fed, lucky to be remembered. But I was never lucky. I was prepared. They did not know the land I walked still answered to my name. They did not know the silence they mistook for weakness was the sound of justice waiting to speak. In a world obsessed with youth and noise, they forgot what endures. They forgot that power doesn't always arrive wrapped in suits or shouted from podiums. Sometimes it comes dressed in soft cardigans and hands lined with time. They saw a frail figure at the edge of their world, a relic, a burden, someone fading into memory. What they did not see was the woman who once stood in the desert heat, planting hope with her bare fingers. They did not see the nights I spent building, believing, and preparing, quietly, relentlessly, because legacy isn't something you're handed. It's something you tend, like a garden no one else believes in. And so when they tried to exile me, tried to erase me with condescension and debt, they didn't realize they were only carving space for my return. Not with vengeance, but with truth. Because the most powerful stories are not the loudest, they are the ones that wait and strike with clarity. They thought they were generous for letting me sit at their table. They did not know I built the house. They mocked my roots. Now those same roots hold the foundation they walk on. This was my story. If it stirred something inside you, if it made you think of your mother, your grandmother, a woman who quietly carried a family while the world looked away, then know this: her story matters, and it's time the world heard it. So join me. Subscribe to Grandma True Stories, where the quietest voices hit the loudest nerves, where forgotten wisdom becomes remembered power, where we reclaim our places at the table, one story at a time, because when Grandma rises, no one leaves the table unchanged.